Welcome to Shiurim in Piyut. Piyutim bring out another dimension to the regular text of the Tefillot in the Siddur. And hopefully, this Shiur will bring out another dimension to Piyut. So, let's start. Uyamti b'chil Kippur. This is a qedushta for the first day of Sukkoth. A qedushta, you ask, what's a qedushta? Qedushta is a kind of karova. That might not help you that much more, but a karova is a series of piyutim composed as a unit by a single poet to adorn the Amidah prayer. It's important to keep this in mind because if you're not aware of this, you might open the Mechler and you'll see a piyut in the first baracha, Magen Avraham, and you'll see another piyut in the second baracha, Mahayei HaMetim, and then after the baracha Mahayei HaMetim, you may see a whole bunch of other piyutim before Kedusha, and you may not realize that these are a composition, and if so, you'll think, oh, this is a random one, this is a random selection, I don't know why they put this here, or who put this here, or why, and maybe I can skip it, and maybe it doesn't matter if it's here, but no, the qedushta is not just a single piyut, it's the whole composition of piyutim. What makes a qedushta different from any other karova? Well, it's specifically for a tefillah that contains kedusha. Now, in our day, every tefillah that's recited out loud, every amidah that's recited out loud contains kedusha, even a weekday mincha. But in Eretz Yisrael, at the time of the early Paitanim, and even the not so early Paitanim, kedusha was recited only in shaharit on a regular Shabbat, and on most Yomim Tovim. On weekdays, it was not recited at all. Not even in Shaharit. Only on Rosh Hashanah was it recited in Musaf as well as Shaharit. And then Yom Kippur is different. Yom Kippur, it's recited in every tefillah, but Yom Kippur is Yom Kippur. Well, not in the night, not in Arvit, but in the tefillot Shaharit, Musaf, Mincha, and Ne'ilah. Now, because of this extra text in the Amidah, the text of the Kedusha, the lofty, angelic, inspiring praise of God, the Paitanim put in a lot of effort into introducing the Kedusha. So you'll see that even though the Qedushta is a kind of karova that contains piyutim typically only for the first three brachot of the Amidah, you won't find just three piyutim there, but you'll find one in the first bracha, two in the second bracha, and in the third bracha, you'll find piyut after piyut after piyut until finally you get to the Kedusha. The bracha in the piyut in the first bracha, Magen Avraham, is called a Magen. You can see at the bottom of the slide. The piyut in the second bracha is called a Mahayei. Again, named after the bracha, Magen is in Magen Avraham. Mahayei is in Mahayei HaMetim. The piyut in the third baracha, you would expect to lead into the third baracha, but at least in the period of piyutim that we have, and which already extends very early, already in so-called pre-classical piyutim, which were unrhymed and unsigned, so we don't know their authors' names, but which seem to have been written already starting in the late Amoraic period, time of the Gemara, in the 4th, maybe 5th century CE, and certainly in classical piyut of the 6th and 7th and 8th centuries CE. This third piyut, which is called the Meshalesh, the trebling, it's the third baracha, and also it's the baracha of Kadosh, 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 3, or sometimes Mishulash, the trebled. One finds it vocalized that way as well. It looks like the first two piyutim in its structure, but instead of leading into a bracha, it leads into all these other piyutim. Good. So we've got the Magain, Mahayan, Mashalesh. What we're going to look at today is the first piyut of Uyamti B'Chil Kippur. So we're going to be looking at the Magain. Now, let's look at a few machzorim that contain this qedushta. So the Vorm's machzor in the 13th century, excuse me. See on the right-hand page, see Uyamti B'Chil Kippur. These are the opening words. The last words, look on the left-hand side of the page. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. Lamed Leheratzot B'Shor V'Chesev. And then it says there's a bunch of pisukim, kakatuv, as it is written. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor sha'aro chesev ha'is ki yivaled vayashivat yamim tachtim mo miyom hashemini v'hal ayeratza el korban ishel Adonai. It says actually miyom instead of umiyom as in Tanakh. Fine, and we recognize these as the opening words of the Kriyat Torah, the laning for this day, the first day of Sukkoth. And there are a bunch of other pesukim, v'ne'amar. So you'll look at the final one, kol ma'ayanai bach. You see that? The last word, bach, opens up this little piyut at the end, bach agila ve'esmecha. It's what's called shir shur, or anadiplosis, anadiplosis, or shir shur, shin reish, shin vav reish, beginning a paragraph or a sentence with the same word that the previous one had as its end. And ultimately, you see in the red, Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avraham. We'll discuss what's going on with all these psukim, what they're doing here, briefly. But let's look at a few other manuscripts. This is what's called the tripartite machzor, because it's in 3 volumes, which are currently in different libraries. This is the volume with Shavuot and Sukkot, which is in the British Library. You see it as a commentary on the side. Already in the Middle Ages, people found the piyutim difficult to understand, and they found them texts worthy of study, of limud, with commentary, not just to be said out loud in the synagogue. And again, you see Uyamti. Look on the right-hand side of the page. Baruch Atah Misod Hachamim. That's a reshut, apologizing or asking permission to insert into the regular liturgy. And then you see the word qedushta, introducing it. See that above Uyamti? It says up there qedushta, and then Uyamti B'Chil Kippur. Fine. On the left-hand side of the page, you'll see those are Leiratzot B'Shor V'Chesev, or Keshor O Chesev. And it has psukim, again with the Bach Agila Esmecha, and concluding Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avraham, and continuing at Gibor. Good. Next. Let's make this full screen. No. Not like that. Went like that. Okay. The Nuremberg Machzor. This is an enormous machzor from the year 1331. You can see from the page spread that there's more text on these because of the enormous dimensions of the volume. Here too, you can see commentary on the side, written in squares and rectangles and circles. And again, look at the bottom of the right-hand page. Preceding it are various piyutim for the Barachot of Kriyat Shema, what we call the Yotzrot liturgy. But here we're in the Kerovah. See in red, it's called rubricated. It says Uyamti B'Chil Kippur. It's hard to see, but above it in red is the title qedushta. And then again, it continues on the left-hand side of the page with the Pesukim and Bach Agila Ve'esmecha, and then in very small letters, Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avraham. Can see the Pesukim better here. There are actually some more Pesukim here than were in some of the others. The orders of Pesukim are sometimes different in different volume, different manuscripts. Let's go further. Printed Ashkenazi Machzor in Saloniki, 1555. That's right. The first printed Ashkenazic Machzor was in a city that is currently in Greece. And in 1555, it was under the control of the Turkish Sultan, Turkish Emperor. So yes, the first printed Ashkenazic Machzor was in a land ruled by Muslims, not by Christians. Isn't that interesting? Because there were Ashkenazim in Greece. And so here too, you see Tefillah Yom Rishon Shel Sukkot B'Kol, the out loud Tefillah on the first day of Sukkot, meaning the Chazans, the Chazarat Hashatz, begins Baruch Atah Misod Chachamim, and then Uyamti B'Chil Kippur. You can see on the side, in little letters, there are instructions. It says, it talks about switching the piyutim, if saying the second one's on the first day, the first one's on the second day, if the first day falls on Shabbos, great. That's a little commentary also in square letters at the bottom of the page. But other psukim here, let's see. Uyamti b'chil kippur. Now let's go on to the second page. Ki yatz'u mahalalim. End of that paragraph. Lehiratzot b'shor v'chesed. Kakatuv ulkachtem lachem bayom rishon. This doesn't really. This pasuk is doesn't really belong here. Maybe here by mistake, by analogy to the piyut on the next the machaya. V'ne'emar shoro chesev, right? Those are that's the one we saw in all the others. And v'ne'emar, and it ends one more pasuk, komayanai bach agila v'esmacha. So it does have a very short list of psukim, but notice how it doesn't list the whole pasuk. The psukim were probably not said at this point. We already see in the late 13th century that the Maharam Rottenberg was not saying these piyutim. It's not clear why. But we'll see they're necessary for the structure. And just so they include the first or the first two and the last, probably because they still wanted to show you the structure of the piyut. How can you understand that little paragraph beginning Bach if you didn't know the pasuk ended Bach? So they still have it here in Saloniki, 1555. Then 2 years later, a bit less than 2 years, a year and change later, in Sabionetta in Italy, 1557, the second printed Ashkenazic Machzor. See again, Uyamti. Here the commentaries and instructions are in Ktav Rashi in cursive script, so it's easier to see what's not prayer text. They still have the psukim, the same psukim that the first one had, and then Bach Agila Betlecha. Great. Now let's look at the Hadrat Kodesh, which is a very influential Ashkenazic Machzor. Its commentary and its instructions were reprinted many times. That's Venice, 1599. We're now over 40 years later. So it's got the commentary on the top of the page in Ktav Rashi. It begins the Baruch Atah Misod Chachamim Uyamti, but that's look, Lehiratzot b'shor v'chesed. And are the psukim there? Nope, the psukim are not there. And in subsequent Ashkenazic Machzorim, we'll skip ahead a few centuries, but in the Rödelheim Machzor, very influential Machzor printed in what's now Germany, Wolf Heidenheim, you see again the large paragraph in the large text indicates B'shor v'chesev. It indicates that the Chazan begins there. It's the end of the paragraph. Chet, meaning Chazan, kiseh sherifu losu b'meisev leheiratzah os b'shor v'chesev. And it says the congregation begins the next paragraph, and the Chazan opens be'im habanim semeh eicha. The no psukim. Nonetheless, the little paragraph at the end is still distinct from the large one. The Machzor Mate Levi, which is very influenced by the Rödelheim Machzor, the commentary is largely copied straight from it, with some extra pieces and with this extra thing, Beis Levi on the side with some explanations of individual words. Again, you can see the paragraph ends. Chazan begins Bach Agila ve'esmecha, and then the Chazan picks up again Be'im Abanim, ending up Baruch Hashem Magen Avraham. Incidentally, all this stuff with the Chazan and the Kahal and all this is relatively late, because as late as the 14th century, 13th century, and quite possibly till printing, the Kahal didn't have Machzorim, possibly on the Yamim Noraim, but on other days they didn't. They listened, and the Chazan said the whole service, the piyutim and the tefillot. And while there's surely many tefillot that the Kahal knew by heart, Piyutim that are recited once a year were presumably not among them. This machzor, Matei Levi, was very influential in Eastern Europe and influenced later machzorim, and you often see the Matei Levi or an abridgment of it in machzorim printed to this day. Here we are, the nearly today, 1981, the Art Scroll machzor, and you can see they've printed everything in block print, and they have this little symbol here indicating that the Chazan should begin. They have these four dots. See the bottom line, Ketesher Yefud Lasu B'Meisev, and then they write all continue all. They write at the top of the next page, and then they have the Chazan begin again. But again, no psukim until the Goldschmidt Franco Machzor Daniel Goldschmidt. Rabbi Daniel Goldschmidt was Dr. Daniel Goldschmidt was a philologist, a scholar of texts in early 20th century Berlin, where he was a librarian, and he moved to Eretz Israel in the 30s, and in the late 50s, he devoted himself to editing critical editions, scientific editions of the Machzorim. He started with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, those were published in 1970, and he immediately started work on Sukkoth, but he died in December 1972, and then later his son-in-law, Professor Yonah Frankel, completed that work and published it in 1981. So he went back to the manuscripts, and you see here, he reintroduced the psukim. Lahiratzot b'shor v'chesev, bottom of the right-hand page, page 98, and on the top, Kakatuv v'yidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor v'ne'emar, and the last one called Mayanai Bach Agila v'Esmacha. So as a scientific edition, he showed you again what were in the manuscripts, and he was not the only scholar in the 20th century who was bringing back piyutim from manuscripts. He was the one who was working on the still surviving Ashkenazic machzor, piyutim that are recited today. But scholars from the time of Davidson were publishing piyutim from the Geniza, from the Cairo Geniza. Israel Davidson was publishing piyutim of Yanai in the early 20th century, and he noticed these strings of psukim. What are they doing here? What's kakatuv and emar, right? So these were lists of verses that had midrashic homilies on them related to the piyut. That the Chazan is the Chazan, who is the Paitan, is somehow giving you. They're not exactly notes on the piyut, but he's not giving you notes on the midrashim of the piyut, but he's giving you notes on the psukim that the midrashim are based on. The problem is, and many times we look at the psukim, we know of no midrashim on those verses, or no midrashim that are connected to the content of the piyut, but we don't have all of midrashic literature. Many midrashim have been lost, so that's not necessarily an argument against it, but it's a weird. The whole argument is a little unusual. Mirsky's argument, this part of his general theory in general, that he thinks that piyut sprung from midrash. Piyut is a kind of prayed midrash. So if the piyut is a kind of midrash, the verses in the chain are not allusions to other midrashim elsewhere. They are the sources of this piyut. The Paitan took the piyut, the psukim, and then he used them to create the piyut. Now, to some extent, that's right. We're going to see strong connections between the piyutim and the piyut. But is that why the Chazan would say them in the tefillah? Maybe. Then Ezra Fleischer was an important scholar of piyut from the 1960s through his death in 2006. Now, contemporary of Mirsky. So his initial theory, well, both of these, his initial theory was somewhat different, and since he modified it, we don't have to look at it directly here. But within his modified theory, he had two ideas. Both of them are the general idea being that the verses somehow lead to the Hatimah, the Bracha, the Baruch Ata Hashem. Why do you need Pesukim? So his first idea is that because there's strict rules of the Gemara says that you need me'ein ha'chatima samuch lachatima. You need the line next to the hatima to be related. Me'ein the hatima. Fleischer says that he suggests maybe the Paitanim were worried that in their own language they couldn't adequately reflect the theme of the Hatima. But Pesukim are tried and true. We have existing Pesukim that we know are related to the Hatima, and those could go directly into it. Problem with that is we see after the Pesukim comes a little paragraph, right? They don't go directly into the Hatima. So maybe in the prehistory of Piyut, they did, as seems likely, but from evidence, but that wouldn't explain why they lasted. Maybe they just became part of the tradition of how to write a Piyut. His other suggestion is that the verses simply alert the listeners that the Hatima is coming up. Yes, the Baitan can use creative words to lead to the Hatima. But what the verses do is, remember, as we said, no machzorim, the people aren't following along with their eyes, they're listening. They're listening to the Hazan. And when they hear kakatu v'nemar, they know the Hatima is coming up and they know it's going to be time for them to respond, Amen. But there's the few lines that intervene between the last pasuk and the Hatima. That's okay. It's just a few words. Once they hear the pasukim, they know the Hatima is coming up. So he thought this was a kind of practical way to weave oneself back into the liturgy. It's all liturgy, but back into the Hatima, the fixed liturgy. And Shulamit Alitzor then wrote, even more recently, her book Sod Mishal Kodesh came out in 2021. You can buy it from Magnus Press or from the World Union of Jewish Studies. She argues that all brachot, all long brachot at least, used to end in Pesukim before the Hatima. We still have this in some brachot. In Nachaim, we have on Tisha B'Av, we say, you destroyed Jerusalem in fire, and you're going to rebuild it in fire. As it says in Zechariah, I'm going to be I think Zechariah, a wall of fire for Jerusalem, and then it goes into the Hatima, Baruch Ad Hashem, and Achim Tzion Uvnei Yerushalayim. Blessed are you, our Lord, who consoles Zion and rebuilds and builds Jerusalem. And we have other brachot like that, where there's a kakatuv and then it goes directly into the bracha. So Elitzur's theory is that this was true in a very early period, in the time of the Amoraim, and presumably even earlier in the time of the Tanaim, when these brachot were being written, to that all brachot before the Hatima have biblical verses. And she argues that the qedushta developed, as we said, the earliest ones seem to come from the end of the period of the Amoraim, or slightly later, since this was the practice, was how you made a bracha. If you're making a piyutified, a poetified bracha, a bracha mefuyetet, they also made the pesukim. Also possible. In any event, the pesukim, even if they are for some kind of practical liturgical need, they definitely do relate to the themes of the piyut. And in a qedushta for shacharit, which, if you'll remember from earlier, is the vast majority of qedushtaot. Why? Because qedushtaot are for days, for services, when in Eretz Yisrael they had kedusha, the kedusha liturgy, the kadosh, kadosh, kadosh in the third bracha. On weekdays they didn't have it at all. On Shabbat they had it only in shacharit. On most yamim tovim they had it only in shacharit. Only on Rosh Hashanah did they also have in Musaf, and in Yom Kippur in all the 4 tefillot. So qedushtaot not for shacharit are only going to be Musaf for Yom Kippur, for Rosh Hashanah, and all tefillah for Yom Kippur. Otherwise, they're going to be for Shaharit. And there's a rule, Chok Zulai, which Menachem Zulai first formulated in the 1930s. 30s. In his dissertation on Babylonian Piyut, that the first verse of the chain of verses of the Magain is going to be the first verse of the day's Torah reading. This. The opening of the Torah reading. The first verse of the first chain of the Mahaya, the second bracha, is going to be the second verse of the day's Torah reading. And the first verse of the verse chain of the Mishalesh, the third piyut of the third bracha, there's an option. It's either going to be the third verse of the day's Torah reading or the first verse of the day's Haftarah reading. Now, this is going to create generally the content of the piyut. So piyutim for parashiot, qedushtot for parashiot, tend to focus around the opening 2 or 3 verses of the parasha or the seder. Parasha being a unit of the annual reading of the Torah, which we still have today with 53, or we today have 54 parashiot. A seder being of the much longer cycle of over 150 sidarim to be read over 3 years. But either way, they tend to focus on the opening verses. On a Yom Tov, it can be hard. After all, if the opening verses of the Yom Tov's reading is Shor Chesed, talking about the rules of when you can offer which animal for a sacrifice, don't generally fit with the themes of the holiday itself. So they have to be creative in how they're going to get to that pasuk. In any event, Okdulai teaches you that the opening verses of the first chains, and therefore the pasuk, the piyutim themselves, are going to be connected to the reading of the Torah. Now, of course, some qedushtot are going to be written for days where there is no special reading of the Torah. For example, a qedushta for Evel, for a Shabbat of mourning, when perhaps there was a tragedy in the community, somebody lost a relative, or if perhaps they were praying in the house, or a Shabbat Nisuin, a Shabbat celebrating a wedding, or so these are familial events, and some special days they are marked by a special reading, but it's only in the Haftarah, like Shabbat Nachamu or Shabbat Shuvah. So in the cases where they're only marked by the Haftarah, the opening of the 3 verse chains are going to be, unsurprisingly, the first 3 psukim of the Haftarah. You don't wait till the Mishalesh to introduce the Haftarah. For the familial ones, where there may not be any special readings, then there's freedom for the Paitan to choose which psukim to use there, and also for qedushtaot for Musaf, Mincha, and Ne'ilah, for the rare days when there are qedushtot for those days. We're almost ready to read the piyut itself, but first let's read this midrash on which it is based. It's Psik to the Rav Kahana 27:2, which equals Vayikra Rabbah 32. What do you mean equals? So chapters, I think it's 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30, or maybe it's only 27 to 30 of Vayikra Rabbah, are effectively identical to a few chapters of Psik to Rav Kahana. Why? What is Psik to Rav Kahana? So unlike midrashim that might be familiar to you, such as Bereshit Rabbah, which goes and comments on the Torah verse after verse, or Midrash Tanhuma, which gives homilies, sermons on the Sidarim and the Parashiot, or the Sidarim which have been reorganized into Parashiot. This one gives you homilies for the special readings of the year, meaning the special readings of the Arba Parashiot, Shabbat Shkalim, Shabbat Zachor in Adar, the special Haftarot, Shabbat Nachamu, and the subsequent, the preceding ones of Haftarot of disaster, which you read during the 3 weeks of mourning, and the 7 of consolation, for Shabbat Shuvah, for Shabbat Hanukkah, and for the Moadim, for the holidays. Now, in Vayikra Rabbah, in what did I say, 26, 27, 28, that is the part of Vayikra that deals with the holidays. So those chapters are the same. Good. Amarid bi'avin, lishnayim shenichnasu etzel hadayan, v'leit anan yad'in heidein hu natzihaya. What is Sukkot? Sukkot is after the days of judgment. So it can be compared to parties that have gone into court, gone to the Dayan, the judge. We don't know which one is the winner. Illa, or Ella, Madi insav bayin, yad'in tuhu natsicha. But the one who is carrying a bayon, a palm branch, we know that that one is the winner. On Rosh Hashanah, the Jews and the archons, it seems to be the angelic protectors of the nations of the world, they enter to bring prosecuting arguments against each other. A bit of a weird usage of makatrikin, that they argue against each other, not just that they're bringing their own case, but it seems that they're arguing against each other. V'leit anan yad'in helein inun itzohaya. We don't know which ones are the winners. We see a lot in the Midrashim, but much more so in Piyutim of Rosh Hashanah, that the Satan is trying to bring down the Jewish people on that day, trying to get them to fail, and they're trying to succeed, and therefore for the Satan to fail. There's an article by Gershom Shalom. I want to thank Yankee Stahl for mentioning this in an article of his, where he points out that the Samach Mem, Samael, that is identified both with Satan and with the Tsar, the Archon, the angelic Archon of the Roman Empire, of Edom. Such that when it's talking about the Archon of the Roman Empire, of the Umot HaOlam, the nations of the world, there's at the same time where the battle is between the Satan and the Jews, and also though between the Roman Empire and the Jewish people. The Roman Empire being the bad guys at the time of the Midrash, and the Kaliri, who were oppressing the Jewish people, and were controlled Eretz Israel. Ella mimashi, so we don't know which one won. Which side won? They leave the court for lulaveim ve'etrogeim b'deim. They're holding their lulavim and their etrogim in their hands. Anan yad'in the Israel innu nitzohaya. We know that the Jews are the winners. Therefore, Moses enjoins Israel, take for yourselves on the first day the 4 species. What is Sukkot? Sukkot is you just left the courtroom, and now not only are you relieved that you've survived, you want to show the whole world that you survived. You take your bayon, your palm branch in hand. So the palm branch was a symbol of victory in the ancient world. And we actually see in this Latin poet, Laus Pisonis, praise of Piso. It's an anonymous Latin poem for the 1st century CE. Hinc quoque servati contingit gloria civis, altaque victrices intexunt limina palmae. So, hence too comes the Loeb Classical Library translation, hence too comes the distinction of saving a fellow citizen in court. It's praising Piso as for his not only for his military success, but also his success as a lawyer, saving a fellow citizen, kiwis. And so victorious palms enwreath the lofty portals. He puts up palm branches everywhere so he knows that he has argued successfully. So too we with the lulav. Good. Time to read the piyut. Moment. Are you with the PowerPoint? Uyamti Yom Kippur. I was in dread. I know la'ayim generally in rabbinic Hebrew and in modern Hebrew is to threaten, but ema is dread, and the Paitan is using this verb as I was terrified in the heel, the trembling of Yom Kippur. Be'uta, terrified. Where do you know this word from? V'haman niv'at milifnei hamelech v'hamalka. Haman was terrified from the king and the queen. Also in the Gemara, we know the word bi'atuta, fear. The cheshbon hasafor, by the account, which was counted, all of our sins, all of our ids, everything was counted. Just a moment. Let us listen here. That was Cantor Mati Boyer singing the opening lines of this piyut. Hopefully you can hear the dread of the feeling of Yom Kippur, the sounds of the Yamim Noraim, the sounds of Kol Nidre. So let us go back to the text. Okay. Galti kuhutstakpor. I rejoiced when my lot, my pur, the word appeared in the Megillah Esther, pur hu hagoral, pur is goral. When my lot was acquitted, Jolek, Kenim Tzahafor, when the pursuer, the Satan, was found ashamed, because he was trying to be makatreg, trying to prosecute against me, and we were trying to prosecute against him, and he was found ashamed because it was all in vain. We won the court case. What's this galti kehutstakpor? To like kenim sachafor. This is a Baitonic usage. Ke means kasher, when. We see this a little in biblical Hebrew with participles, with the what gets taught in modern Hebrew as the present tense, the hoveh, but there isn't really a present tense in biblical Hebrew. It's a participle kind of adjective, v'hi keforahat, and as it was blooming in Parashat Miketz, but the Paitanim greatly extended that, and that you can use it with any verb in any tense. Ke meaning when, kasher. So galti kehutstak pur means I rejoiced when it was acquitted, my lot. So like kinim tzachafora, the pursuer, when he was found ashamed. Good. Hudra'u, mitei holalim, the men of folly, of holalut, were condemned to horror, to devastation. What's that word? Hudra'u. A verb has been made from the noun deira'on. The last verse of Isaiah, the Haftarah of Shabbat Rosh Chodesh, according to the Babylonian and current practice. Vayudeira'on l'chol basar. They shall be an abhorring to all flesh. There will be a horror. Appears also at the end of Daniel. So they were condemned to horror. V'tsumatu, they were cut off, like tzimidut. L'regev halalim, to be halalim, to be corpses. L'regev, for the clods of earth. Zakim ke yatsu mahalalim. When Yatsu, right? We learned that usage. When the innocent went forth reciting Hallel, Mahalalim, Halim Visharim Kaholalim, dancing and singing, or fluting and singing, Kaholalim, like flutists, as in Halil. The mood has just changed vastly. We had the dread of Kippur, and suddenly we're dancing and singing like flutists. But that's Tishrei for you, a whirlwind of different emotions. And here we went through them in just a few lines. Now, what do they do to show how happy they are and that they've been victorious? Tiat atzei esev, planted, tiat atzei esev, trees of plants, of vegetation. Yis'u hayom, they carry them today. Mizbeach lahasev, to walk around the altar. This is the text that appears in the vast majority of manuscripts and all the printed editions. What's the problem? Two problems. One, there is no Mizbeach today. The Kaliri is writing in the 6th, 7th century, long after the destruction of the temple. He wrote many, many kinot, which we recite on Tisha B'Av. It's clearly long after the destruction. What's he saying? They carry them today to walk around the altar. So before we start looking at variant texts found in a tiny number of manuscripts, let's try to make sense of this. The Kaliri in many places, that's what we call Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Kalir, the author of this Yut. I should have introduced him earlier. One of the greatest Paitanim of all time and the backbone of the Ashkenazic Machzor. He's in Eretz Yisrael in the 6th to 7th century. He's standing in the synagogue where he's going to be, we assume, at least following our current practice, performing hakafot around the Sefer Torah with a lulav. Just as in the temple, hakafot were performed around the Mizbeach. And he's blurring past and present dreamily, imagining himself today in the temple. And we see elsewhere, especially in Piyutim of Sukkoth, that he lists mitzvot that we do today and mitzvot that were only in the temple, and it's all in one big mix because it's this especially you comes across in this line because it's so short and altogether, the dreaminess of imagining what we're doing now, but imagining it on another scale in the temple. They say of certain Hasidic Rebbes that when they would eat the kazayat matzah for Afikomen, they would taste the taste of the Korban Pesach. Again, dreamily merging the present with the past and the wished for future. Let's listen how Moti Boyer sings this, gets across that dreamy nature of it in this recording. You hear the dreaminess, the yearning, and the sort of otherworldliness, not right, being right here in the moment at the same time not being. Also, evoking the slow lidl, the slow niggin, evoking the mood of na'anuim, of the waving of the lulav in the various directions. Okay? Ketesher yefulasu b'meisev. May they be considered like a gift. A tesher. What is tesher? Once in Tanakh, you have the word teshurah in the book of Shmuel. So we don't have the teshurah to bring to the man of God. We don't have a gift. The etymology of this word is totally unknown. Teshurah, maybe it's from shur, to see. The gift sees the presence of the recipient. We don't really know. But Paitanim really like taking nouns of all forms in Tanakh and making segolate nouns. That's this kind of noun where general, assuming no guttural letter, which can change the nikud, where you have two segals and the noun is stressed on the first syllable. Tesher. So teshurah becomes tesher, and this is lashon paitanim. This is a word that gets used by paitanim fairly often. May they be considered like a gift here, a sacrifice. In their walking around the Mesev, in their hakafa. Or alternatively, could mean in God's presence as God is in Misibo, Adsha Melech B'Misibo, lying on his heavenly couch in the Kisei HaKavod, the divine throne. But let's read it for now as Yefulasu b'Meisev, as they and they're walking around, since we were just speaking about that. Lehiratzot b'shor v'chesev, to be found favorable, to be accepted through shor v'chesev. What's shor v'chesev? It's the reading for the day. Shor v'chesev o'es. Through the reading of the day, they may be found favorable. But lehiratzot, the language of ritzoi, is the language of sacrifices. So it's to be acceptable just as the sacrifice. And in fact, in one of the manuscripts we looked at, it said lehiratzot keshor v'chesev, to be accepted like a sacrifice of an ox or a lamb. So what's going on here? We've got that they should be, their carrying of the lulav in the circumambulations and the hakafot around the Torah should be accepted like a sacrifice, but also accepted through, they also should be accepted through the reading of the Torah, because the reading of the Torah about the sacrifices takes place of the sacrifices. And indeed, these are the opening words of the first pasuk. Really, the second pasuk, because the first one is Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, but the first pasuk with content beyond that, which is going to go into the verse chain here. And you see the word Yeratzeh, fourth word before the end, Yeratzeh l'korbani shel Hashem. It will be found favorable for a fire offering. Here to be found favorable through Shor Chesev. This is the stanza as we have it. Remember, I said that there are two problems with that second line. Yis'u hayom mizbeach la'seif. One is there's no mizbeach, but I give an explanation that certainly is fitting, that he blurs the past, the present, and the future to imagine himself in the past temple and in the future temple while standing here presently in the synagogue. Also, though, this is the only line with four words. If you look at the rhythm of the poem, every single line, Uyamti b'chayil kippur, Beruta b'chashbon hasafor, galti kutztakbor, every line had only three words. And given that up to the Pesukim, there are only four stanzas, only three stanzas, and each stanza has only four lines, and each line has only four words, has only three words. It's a very short poem. Has four words. Could he have diverged from the meter, the rhythm? Maybe. But there is a variant in one French manuscript. Instead of Yisu Hayom Mizbeach Laseh, Yisu Hayom B'Meisev. They carry them today walking around. But the next line also has B'Meisev. So first of all, that's not really a problem. Paitanim will reuse words in the rhyme. And second of all, if you look in that manuscript, the second line, that line says Ketesher Gefulasupit Tosev. Whatever that means, that may be another Pythonic word with the same meaning, also from the root Savav. Or it might mean something else. It doesn't really matter for our purposes, because in any event, we're looking at this line with Yisu Hayom B'Mesev. They carry them walking around. In my translation, I forgot to delete the word today no. That's right. The word that's missing is Mizbeach. They carry them today walking around. That solves the problem. What? The synagogue doesn't contain a Mizbeach? He's saying he doesn't contain the word Mizbeach in this line. Thing is, most manuscripts do have it. Now, there's an even more divergent version of the line. Down here, Yitz'u Hayom B'Chosef. They carry them today with yearning. This is found in a Geniza fragment of the poem. There's only one Geniza fragment of this part of the qedushta. Geniza fragments are generally from much older than European manuscripts, and they are from the Middle East, closer to where the original Paitanim wrote. They're still several hundred years after Rabbi Elazar Berbi Kilir. They're not necessarily more accurate than the European, the French, and Ashkenazi, and when relevant, other European manuscripts. But it's always important to investigate them. There's only one fragment of this poem, and as Yiswa Yom B'Chosef, they carry them today with yearning. If so, that would be an even bigger chiddush regarding this poem, or rather, it would undo a chiddush, because what? We know that in the temple, they performed hakafot, either with the lulav or the arava, around the Mizbeach. We also know that today, and for the last at least 1,200 years, certainly 1,100 years, the practice has been in the synagogue to perform hakafot. Actually, longer than that, but through the time of the Gaonim, to perform hakafot in the synagogue. But if you look in the Talmud and the Midrashim, you look in the Talmud Bavli, the Talmud Yerushalmi, and the Midrashim, the time of Chazal, it never says that hakafot with these plants were performed in the synagogue. It only mentions that they had been performed in the past in the temple. Now, if indeed the correct version of the line is Yis'u Hayom Mizbeach Lahasev, as in the vast majority of manuscripts and all printed editions, and as we recite the line today in the Tefillah, in the Piyut, then this is evidence that at the time of the Kaliri, the 6th, 7th century in Eretz Israel, they were performing this ritual in the synagogue. That's true whether we have the Yis'u Hayom Mizbeach Lahasev, in which case he's merging the past with the present. Well, then maybe a little less so, because maybe he's just holding the lulav and imagining going around the Mizbeach. But certainly the version without the word Mizbeach, Yis'u Hayom B'Mesev, they carry them around today. They carry them walking around, would show that this ritual was performed at the time of the Kaliri. If the original version is in fact Yis'u Hayom B'Chosef, they carry them today with yearning, then you could not prove that at the time of the Kiliri, they performed the circumambulations, the walking around the Sefer Torah in the synagogue on Sukkot. But you ask, what about all the piyutim of Hoshanot? Well, we recite them when walking around, but we don't know how they recited them at the time. And even today, on the day that falls on Shabbat, Ashkenazim recite a piyut, Om Nitzura, a Hoshana piyut, and a second Hoshana piyut also after that. We say them standing in place, and traditionally Sfaradim did as well. Today, they've, for the most part, given that up, but that's a recent development. So you can have a concept of saying Hoshana piyutim without actually marching around. But again, if you have Yis'u Hayom B'Mesev, then yes, this is evidence, an important evidence, that in the time of the Kaliri, this ritual was performed, despite not being mentioned in other early sources from the time as a synagogue ritual. I would be remiss if I would not mention where I got these textual variants. I did not examine all these manuscripts myself. Rather, the late Michael Rand, whose untimely death last year shocked the world of Jewish academia, worked for years with Shulamit Elitzur, with Professor Shulamit Elitzur, on the piyutim of Rabbi Lazar bar Rabbi Kilir. And together they published his piyutim for Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur, and worked on volumes for other occasions which are not yet out. Among the material that he worked on was the piyutim for Sukkoth, and it was he who found these variants. And Professor Elitzur generously shared them with me and allowed me to use them in this shiur. May Michael's memory be a blessing. Let's look. Here I have this picture of Solomon Schechter poring over fragments from the Cairo Geniza. The Cairo Geniza was a room where hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, of little pieces of paper from holy books, from Shemus, were thrown. And the task of putting them together is immense, especially because now they are in libraries around the world. So the fragment from the Geniza, where I got that variant, Bechosef, let's look at it. See this here? For years, it was thought that this qedushta, Uyamti, certainly the beginning of it, that the beginning pieces of it were found only in European machzorim, not in the Geniza. Until Michael, examining all the evidence, found this fragment. Look at it. You can see on the right, I have the fragment. You can only see the left of the page. It's torn. And on the left, I have I've made a transcription of it. The letters that I have supplied from the text that we know from other manuscripts, I put in black in brackets. And the letters that are on the manuscript itself, I indicated it in red, except the very last word, bechosef, in blue, to show you, since that's the word we were interested in. You see what skill it takes to find a manuscript of this with really just fragments of the words and recognize, oh, it's that piyut, and be able to include it in the edition. And the value that it gives us in that one word that we found at the end, which is so different. This takes real skill. Now, I admit that regarding this particular page, if I had spent time examining it, I would have been able to figure out that it is this piyut, because I know Uyamti so well. It's a piyut that we recite every year. But the skill that it takes to find and identify much less well-known piyutim, which Michael Rand did, and he was able to make joins, say, oh, this manuscript belongs to this manuscript. They've been torn and are in different libraries and different continents now. That was great skill. So that's this manuscript. The other one, the French one, before we get there, I just want to show you the problem with the word bechosef. We said it solves the problem of has 4 words. The others have only 3 words. The other lines have only 3 words. And we had the problem that, is he talking about, was the poet talking about the present or talking about the time of the Mikdash, the past and the future? This variant would seem to solve it. But there's a different problem. Hi'at asay esev yisu hayom b'chosef. Sev, rhyming with Seth. We find that marginally among Ashkenazic Paitanim, barely. There's a Kina for Tisha B'Av, which rhymes Eshav, Eshaf. But we don't find this at all in the poetry of Rabbi Lazar bar Rabbi Kilir. which suggests that this version is suspicious. It's important that we found it here in the Geniza. It's not necessarily right. And maybe it's more likely that the one that we found in that French manuscript, Yisu Hayom B'Mesev, is actually the right one. It is 3 words, and it doesn't have that rhyme problem. You see it here on the right. I have the text, and on the left, I have my transcription. I've highlighted the relevant words. Yisu Hayom B'Mesev. The Northern French miscellany is a miscellany of text, and in the center there's a machzor. And you can see here's the whole page. On the sides, on the right in the margin, you can see there's Nevi'im. This is from Yeshayahu. V'hu am bazuz v'shasoi, afeach bachurim kulam. I don't actually know whether this is the entire book of Yeshayahu or just the Haftarot, whether it's the Haftarah of Bereshit or the whole book. On the bottom, you can see this is the book of Tehillim. Behema, Remes, V'tzipor kanaf malcheretz v'chol le'umim. This is Psalm 148. In any event, this is the manuscript, and in the center you can see the machzor. Anyway, back to our qedushta ritual. Good. Ketesher Yefula Subamesa, may they be considered like a gift in the work to be favorable through reading or as an ox or lamb. And we have the psukim. An ox or a lamb or a goat, when it is born, must be 7 days with its mother, and from the 8th day onward will be found favorable, just as we're asking to be found favorable for a fire offering unto the Lord. Who is first given to me that I should repay everything under the heavens is mine. This verse is not alluded to directly in the Piyut, but there is a midrash on Shoroch Chesef that connects to this verse, saying, God says, I gave everything to you. When you bring me a sacrifice, you're only bringing me what I already gave you. Nobody gave first to me and I'm repaying. Rather, I gave first and you're repaying. The inclusion of this verse would actually support Davidson's idea that the verses allude to midrashim that connect to the piyut, even if they're that connect to verses that are quoted in midrashim that somehow connected to the piyut, even though the verse doesn't connect to the piyut. V'nemar, more relevant, Ivdu et Adonai b'yirah v'chilu b'irada. Serve the Lord with awe and be joyous while trembling. Why? Because our piyut started with Uyamti b'chil. I was terrified in the trembling of Kippur, and then already in the 3rd line we had Galti kubit, when my lot was justified, was vindicated, I was rejoicing. So here you got right here together, Gilu bir ada, rejoice while trembling, all the emotions together. In some manuscripts you have more verses than just this. We saw it's a whole bunch. He has also with Hashem simcha. Praise God with, serve God with joy, and come in front of him with joyous song. Again, that is relevant to the later part where it says that we're rejoicing and singing as like flutists and dancers, but it doesn't have that yirah part. It doesn't have that trembling part, the fear. And other verses, Az Yoranenu Atzei Hayar Milifnei Hashem. All of the trees of the forest are going to sing in joy in front of God. Again, not alluded to directly in the piyut, but we talked about eitz, tree. We had tiat atzei esev, the plants which we hold, and we had singing. We had plants and singing, and that verse has them together. And then the last line, and singers like flutists say, all my well springs are in you. Directly connected, we saw about singing and fluting, singing like fluting, singing like dancing. The last word, bach, you'll see in some newer machzorim, the last 150 years, you'll see becha, because they say, wait, it's the first word of the line. It doesn't in this pausal form. B'chagila, why bach? But it has to be bach because the way that your shur works is you take the last word of the previous line and you make it as the one of the next line. Bach gila v'esmacha, and you, I will be glad and happy. Which is also nice because we have in Hallel, we have Zayom Asa Adonai Nagila v'nismacha bo. May we rejoice and be happy on it or in him through God. Bach agila v'esmacha, berina b'simcha, with joyous song and happiness. Let's just hear Chazanas on that again from Mati Boyer. You get the idea. The mood is one of dancing, of niggin, of very very different mood from the moods that we saw earlier, either of the dread of the beginning, the dread of Kippur, B'Chayil Kippur, or of the yearning with the Tiat Aseh Esev, Yitzhu Hayom Mizbeach LaHasev. Incidentally, the version we found in that manuscript, Yitzhu Hayom B'Chosef, with yearning, would coincidentally fit very well with the mood of the melody that we heard earlier, because it expressed yearning, but for a very different reason. One, because it contains the word yearning, but with the text that's nahug today, because it expresses, talking about the Mizbech, expresses the yearning and the dreaming to be in not just in the present, but also in the past and the future. And then the final lines leading to the conclusion of the bracha, the Eim Habanim Semecha, in the happy mother of children. What does that mean? I mean, the words appear in Hallel, so maybe it just means with reciting these words in Hallel. Maybe it is an epithet for the Jewish people. Maybe it's an epithet for Jerusalem. But whatever that is, Gonenenu Biftut Samecha, shield us with deliverance, which will spring up. Maybe a slight allusion, samecha, to the plants of sprout up of Sukkoth, but not necessarily. The important thing here is the word gonenenu, shield us, which is our me'ena hatima, leading to the end of the bracha. Brochat Hashem, Magain, shield of Abraham. And there we go.